I'm going to turn it over to these folks to talk about mastering the interview.
Thanks, Nick. So, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, it sucks a little bit to have your lunch interrupted, so we won't feel really badly when you guys aren't looking at us. But if you can listen to us, if we can give you a bunch of great tips about how to make it through interview season. It is part of my favorite time of the year. Doug and I have worked together for the last 2 years to make sure we're giving you a lot of great pointers. And so please stop us. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll try to get through everybody. So because we are so organized, didn't get our slides in, so we're just going to talk off of the list that we have. That way it will be very interactive. Doug?
It has nothing to do with organization. We're old school, and this should be a conversation, and that's how we thought. But I put up this one slide. Dr. Gisondi referred to this, and I think it's important, and this was kind of our starting point, right? One of the big questions everybody asks, how many interviews do I need to go on? Right, and so this is the graph that he's referring to, and it's a little bit hard to read, but you can see the graph really starts to level out around 10 interviews and basically approaches that asymptote of 1 somewhere around 12 to 13 interviews, right? So if you just kind of think about diminishing returns, you know, going on 15 interviews, 17 interviews, 20 interviews. I interviewed somebody last year who did 19 interviews. It doesn't really help you out anymore, and it's really hard to maintain your energy and be excited about a program and, you know, answer the question about why emergency medicine for the 19th time. And, you know, if you talk to 3 or 4 people and then you multiply that by 19, like, you're answering that question 60 times. Like, it's hard to be genuine at that point. So, you know, really think about that. I always encourage my people as they get more and more interview offers as the season kind of goes on, start thinking about which ones you're going to jettison, where are they on your list, have you really thought about these programs, which are the programs that are most interesting to you. Do you have any thoughts about, you know, how do I decide what interviews I'm going to cancel?
So not so much what I'm going to cancel, but how we cancel them, I think, is what I talked about last year. So most of us are heading towards programs like Interview Broker and the one that is actually on the ARIS website that auto cancels and auto fills. So what you used to have to do if you wanted to cancel your date or change the date was to call the coordinator and let them know. And we used to give you a lot of grief if that happened in a very short amount of time, like you cancel on Friday night for a Monday interview. That's still the case. You cancel on a Monday night for on a Friday night for a Monday interview. It's kind of a big deal because if you think about, it's not the people with the 19 interviews that we're worried about. It's the people with what? 4 interviews, 6 interviews, 7 interviews. And potentially, when I have to run a day that only has 9 applicants as opposed to 10, I feel bad because I still know at the end of interview season, there are people who will go unmatched. It is just the way it goes. And so I would say looking at those things, canceling in a timely manner is great. You don't need 19 interviews, but if you have 6 or 7 or 4, please sit down with your advisee because we need to figure out what the plan, the strategy, who do you need to cold call? Are you looking at new programs? Are you looking at any programs that might potentially have a changed complement of how many residents they take and maybe they can get you in the door? So it's definitely part of the issue.
Yeah, as Cynthia said, you know, one of the things, the shift to Interview Broker has been humongous. Almost every program is using either Interview Broker or some other electronic equivalent. There's at least 2 other companies out there similar to it. So it makes scheduling the interview really easy, and it makes canceling the interview fairly painless. You just sort of, you know, click yourself off for that day. One thing that I did want to point out is Interview Broker has a filter in it where if you try to double book interviews, so if you're offered a spot, you know, on one day and then you get offered a spot the same day at a different program, it will allow you to hold that for, I think it's 24
hours.
And then it sends a notification to the program director, and it sends a warning to you of, hey, you have this double booked. 2 of the other programs that I'm aware of actually don't even allow you to double book interviews. So again, as you're kind of heading into this process, you know, you almost need to have this running rank list of these are the programs I'm most interested in, I'm a little less interested in these, I would go there if it came down to it, you know, so that you can kind of drop interviews as new ones come in and you don't have to sit there and agonize over that, you know, while the clock is ticking on Interview Broker. So.
Yeah, I also think regionally it makes sense. So I'm in Connecticut, and if I've got somebody from California who's coming to visit in January, and they specifically booked that date in October for January 20th, I'm in fear that regionally you will be completely tapped out and done by that point, and I'm on the verge of being let go. So I think about list and strategy in my head, trying to read your brain, just like you guys are trying to read the program's brain. How come they didn't invite me on October 2nd and they invited me on November the 4th? We are all trying to read each other's brain. I don't think you should read a whole lot into it, but I do think whatever you do, you should need to have a strategic plan. So if you know you're going to be in California for the month, then put all of those as your priority for the month that you're out there doing your aways. See if people will interview you while you are actually out there doing your rotations. There's a lot of different ways you can have that lets us know that you were strategic in the way that you interviewed, and you didn't just put out 160 applications and that you are now trying to cancel 13 of your 27 interviews. Again, a great problem to have. Usually the people we talk to are on the other end.
So how many of you guys have already planned your 4th year out? Like you have your schedule, you know it all? Okay. So, one of the points that you made is, in terms of thinking about your schedule, you want to leave November and December fairly open so that you can go off and do your interviews. There are a number of programs that will start interviewing sometime in October, and there are quite a few that interview into January. But by and large, the bulk of your time needs to be freed up for November and December. That's when most of your things are going to happen. In terms of away rotations, obviously you want to have those done. We've already covered that stuff. And then how about preparing for interviews? Do you guys do mock interviews at your program?
Yeah, so we do mock interviews at my program. Again, I'm at University of Connecticut. We start fairly early. We have snow. So they were thinking a couple years ago about this international date of when they're going to release and start interviewing. And everybody's like, oh yeah, it starts like, sounds like a fantastic idea. And all of the East Coast programs in the Northeast were like silent. There was none. And finally, one of them said, we are not waiting till November 15th to start interviewing because we have this stuff called snow. And then all of us jumped in. We're like, yeah, we start because we don't know what's going to happen. And so our first interview date is November, loosely 15, sometime mid-November. And that's when we will bring in everybody from UConn and do a practice interview. It helps us test the system. It helps them test. We sit them down and give them feedback afterwards about how they answered questions, what their body language looked like, how they chose their words. There are crazy questions that are out there. Tell me your greatest weakness. Well, that's a poorly designed question, but there are some strategic ways to sit down and answer questions like that, and those are the ways that we practice. So anybody else get mock interviews before you go out? Yeah, it's a great idea. Almost everybody in some flavor of their world has had to look at somebody who's interviewing for a job. Look at your attire. Look at your body language. And your mother can tell you that. Your pharmacist at Walgreens, hey, how's this suit look? I'm going to go on an interview. Ask them questions, because I think we sometimes have a blind spot to how we look and how we are coming across. And so mock interviews are fantastic. I'm sure he's going to talk about it with the SBI, same kind of thing. People are practicing and looking at their ums and ahs. So get the opportunity to use the mock interview if you don't have a chance. And if you don't have somebody doing mock interviews, by all means, there are gazillion places online to get practice questions, right? If you are not practicing questions, you're going to do yourself a disservice. Everybody's going to get the, why did I go to med school? Why do I want to help people? Why did I choose emergency medicine? And then beyond that, how many questions are y'all using?
It kind of varies interview to interview, but along those same lines, I was going to say, most dean's office offer mock interviews, and if you can't find it, I did a quick Google search yesterday as I was preparing for this session, and just typed in, practice emergency medicine interview questions, and probably got about 40 different hits.
Sure.
And looked through it, and I was like, yep, I've asked that one, I've asked that one, I've asked that one. So, there's a number of questions that, again, they should just roll off your tongue. And as you're doing mock interviews, whether it's with a friend or even just, in front of your phone while you're taking a video or something like that, really do practice saying these things out loud. These answers should come out fairly quickly and easily. There shouldn't be a lot of stuttering and hemming and hawing about, why do I want to go into emergency medicine? You can imagine in an interview setting that's not an answer you want to look unsure of. And also, like Dr. Price mentioned, being aware of your tics, right? Your body language, how you sit, how you look at people, just gestures.
It sounded like you said being aware of your tits. Did you say tits?
I said tics.
Really?
From Connecticut, yeah.
All right, so I wouldn't put the question like that, but we definitely can talk about attire. I would maybe say the girls, if you are uncomfortable with your attire, whether that is pulling, whether it's tugging, whether it's, does this tie really go with this shirt? And I'm trying to be artsy-fartsy and I just want to put it out there and wear white shoes in November. Just don't. Just don't.
I realized I said tics, like vocal tics.
No, you said tits. I asked you 3 times did you say tits. Did y'all hear me ask him, did he say tits? Because I was like, why is that man behind me?
I just realized, I'm like, she misheard me.
Why is he talking about tits? I was like, okay. Anyway.
Don't do that on the interview.
Yes, whatever you do.
Don't do that on the interview.
That'd be bad. There are clearly some questions people are not allowed to ask you, and one of them might be about things. But I do think looking very much at how you look in the mirror is just important. I get 1,000 applications for my spots. If you have made it through and you happen to be one of the 220 people that out of that list you have been granted an interview, we are looking for reasons to cross you off the list, right? Because you already went through all the paperwork. You look good. Your scores must have been good. Your letters must have been good. You didn't have any drama. You do great community service. You speak Spanish. All those things that we look at. And so when you come, if you think in your brain, this interview it makes the job mine to lose, because you've already won. If you've gotten an interview, you've kind of already won. You've achieved what you want to do. But if you don't pay careful attention to the way you look, the things you say, and the way you're coming across, the job is yours to lose. Because anybody who gets an interview, for some reason, they have decided they want you. And you might not know what that reason is. They might be looking for girls with brown hair. We don't know. Or they might be looking at you because you've done a lot of research in an area that is interested to their program. You do not know why you got the interview, but you should pat yourself on the back that you got the interview, and then pay very close attention to how you look, how you're coming across, and what we have. Do you have anything else to say on attire?
That actually opened up a whole world of additional points. So, how are you coming across is very important. And I think part of that is the questions that you ask, right? You're coming on this interview, they're going to ask you questions, and of course, you're going to ask them questions, right? So, number one, be aware of who you should ask a question of, right? If you've looked on the website and you want to talk to somebody about the clinical schedule, the chair of the department, not the person to talk to you about the clinical schedule, right? That's a good resident level question, chief resident question, night out kind of a question. Whereas, if you want to talk about big changes to the program and directions of where things are going, like that's a great program director question. And again, if you do some online searching, you will find lists of, these are good questions to ask of residents, these are good questions to ask of program directors, these are good questions to ask of, day-to-day clinical faculty who also come in and interview. So that's one thing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, take that Google search one step further. I can tell who has bothered to spend 2 minutes to Google my program.
Yep.
It's just so evident that I'm either a space filler for you, or you are really into me and my people and my program and what I have to offer. just take a couple of minutes. Look, because maybe have there been any major changes in the last 3 years, and you didn't look online to see that we've got a brand new program director and we just moved into a brand new hospital and all that stuff is online on the first page of where it's listed for my program. I'm not sure you really care about coming to what we have. And I would say that you guys are like, well, that's presumptuous of you to think that we have that kind of time. It takes a minute on your phone. It takes a minute or two on your phone. You just need to make sure you're paying attention to the details. In terms of questions, I always think you also don't really care if you don't have any questions for me. So I love it when people say, well, Dr. Price, you've been at UConn 14 years. Is there anything else you want to achieve? Or does your program have any new hopes, goals, or aspirations to try something new? And then I could say, oh, well, we're going to start an EMS fellowship, the house toxicologist riding on the ambulance. It's a fallacy. It's okay. Smile. Yes. So, yes, I can tell you about the new racks that we're going to bring in and have people practicing the schedule on them, like all sorts of things. But it gives me the opportunity to tell that you are interested. And for those people who come in, especially early in the day, we have a series of 5 interviews. Every place is structured a little bit differently. Sometimes you'll go places and you will have 6 15-minute interviews, or you have 4 20-minute interviews, or you'll have 1 group interview, and then they'll break you up and have 2 10-minute interviews with different faculty, and not everybody goes through the same 2, and then those people will come back. There are a myriad of different ways that we are trying to look at you and discover what makes you tick. So make sure you use the opportunity to ask questions as you trying to figure out what's your place in our world. Because all of us have this fantastic fruit basket. And if you are a long, tall glass of milk or a fine steak, that might be fabulous, but you're not going to fit in my fruit basket. And so I can tell by sometimes your interest level that you've gotten some questions, or you're like, okay, well, is your residency a dog residency or a cat residency? Loved it when somebody asked that last year. I was like, that's a great question. We are mostly a dog residency, but we do have a couple of crazy crap people that will be able to help. But yeah, people take the dog. It told me they were looking to see, did they fit in? So lots of fun things like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great strategy. Going back to what you said before, I think as you're preparing for the interview, you guys are going to have, kind of like the last presenters alluded to, right? This list of generic questions that you want to know. It's, those things that you're looking for in a program. And then I think it's important to have a second list that are a little bit more specific to the program that you're going to interview at. And so as you're preparing for the interview, as you're flying out on the plane, or it's the night before or whatever, kind of go through those lists, look over the website, cross off the questions that are answered on the website, have that ready. Do you guys do an overview at your program?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Every program does an overview, right? And they emphasize the things that are important and what they think is special about their program, and they're going to answer 3 or 4 more of your questions. I know nothing irks one of our program directors more than asking a question that was answered in the overview. Like that's...
And then you're like, oh, well, what about this? Did you listen to the overview? Were you sleeping? We don't mind if you sleep, you're tired, you guys are still working, you're doing stuff, but you got to at least pretend to look at it. The other thing I will say is, if you are looking for the opportunity to ask questions, I want to know if you are interested, but mostly that starts at the night before. Those residents have specifically given up their free night to be available for you to ask all the questions that you might not want to ask me. And so it's a little bit of a ding if you don't make the night before, because that's your opportunity to get some stuff answered. We have 10 applicants come in, and inevitably there are 2 that can't make the night before, whether it's a work schedule or a travel thing. It's not a horrible ding, but I am listening to figure out what exactly was your conflict, and then how can I get you in front of a resident so that the stuff you don't want to ask me, you still have the opportunity to ask, whether it's a lunch or whether it's trying to find you a buddy who cares about hyperbarics because you want to know about hyperbarics, and that's where you were the night before, is you had the opportunity to do something. And so I would say just have an answer and a reason for just about everything, because we asked her in the overview just so we know. We know we have this fabulous SIM center. How many of you guys got to go out last night and hear the residents talk about it? And if 8 people raised their hand, I know how much time to spend on it. And if only 2 people went to the night before, I need to spend more time on maybe some of the things that the residents always end up talking about.
Or your residents aren't doing their job.
Or my residents aren't doing their job, for sure. But there are specific questions that, don't ask us about salary, most likely. Ask the residents, do you have enough money to live? Is it a struggle to live here? Because I'm going to hope that I know, but I'm a little bit removed for that because I don't live on that salary schedule that my residents do. So that's a great question for the residents.
But going back to the night out, one of the things that I always talk with my students about is, especially for programs that you're really interested in, making sure that you schedule plenty of time, right? That you can get there for the night out. Maybe you get there a day early so you can look around the city, or you stay late. There are a few things that show less interest in a program than, when 3/4 of the way through the interview day, you're like, hey, I got to skip my last 2 interviews because I got to catch my flight. That tells me, you're probably not that interested in my program. Whereas when an applicant, is like, hey, I'm staying in Seattle the next 2 days, what's a great restaurant to eat at? What are some fun things for me to go do? I'm like, wow, this is a person who's
Can I
really
stay in
interested.
shadow in the ED for 4 hours?
Right.
Absolutely.
And not every program will let you shadow, but I guarantee you, it certainly shows a bigger interest if you have set aside a little extra time. And I'll tell you, on the back end, right, it's way easier to extend a trip by, say, 24 hours when you're already in that city than it is to try and come back in, February to get a second look, or to, look for an apartment or whatever. It's just, because that's part of your decision, right? Is, can I live in this place? Is this going to be a good place for me to live? Are there things to do? Are there apartments I can go to? So.
It's very different going to an interview in Wisconsin, where they might be the only program for 6 states around. Coming to my program, I'm an hour and a half from New York. I'm an hour and a half from Boston. There's 692 programs around in the same area as mine. And so I know that causes some good things and some bad things in coming on, but it also gives you the opportunity. We tell people, if you're going to be in the area and you got to go to New York and you want to come back and look at our program, or you have some more questions. And one guy said, my wife's going to join me in New York next week. Can I bring her up here and show her around? I was like, by all means. And then I gave them the chief residence number so that they can come. And so not that you have to go the extra mile all the time, but we look for things that are going to make you stand out. I had a very unfortunate med student that drove up from New York. And New York can be an hour and a half, or it can be 5 hours, depending on when the traffic is. In North England, New England, okay, y'all know what I'm talking about. So this very nice gentleman got in the car and he drove up from Manhattan and got to our place around 6. And our interview started 7:15. And there's Dunkin' Donuts right across the street. My man went to Dunkin' Donuts and fell asleep in the car. And at 9 o'clock, we were calling him, hey, where are you? And he was mortified. Well, guess who matched at my program? Because he tried to do the right thing by getting there early. And so there's stuff that happens. Should be prepared for this stuff. But we smile because you don't ever know. But one of those things that looking at the opportunities to ask and to see, also showing us that you're willing to go the extra miles, fantastic.
All right, Nick just gave me that we're almost out of time.
I think we had only one more thing that we didn't cover.
So one of them was the thank you notes question.
Yes.
And I will tell you again, among the program director community, this keeps coming up. And a lot of people are like, I wish we could just do away with that. The analogy that I make is sort of like fetal monitoring, right? Like everybody does it, but there's no evidence that it actually helps anything. And so, what I would say is if you can write a genuine, honest to God, I loved your program and here's why letter, sure, go ahead and do that. But if you're writing thank you for inviting me for your interview day, love, Doug.
Especially email, where you could just clip and paste it to everyone. We're I got the same email.
Honestly, just don't bother with that letter, because what what that letter says to me is somebody told you to write the letter, and so you did what somebody told you to do, and that's about all I ever get out of that. But again, if you sparked, you said, man, you guys said you're opening an EMS fellowship, and I'm so excited about that, I can't wait. Like that's a great letter to write, and I think that does probably help you a little bit, at least to really say again, I'm really interested in your program, because that's
Price,
what we're trying to figure out.
I really enjoyed our conversation about wellness and residency, and you have some great ideas, and I have some great ideas. I'm looking forward to working with you should the fates allow. Thank you very much for the interview. I was like, move that person to the top of the list. We are actually going to be sitting back down at the tables. Feel free to come over and talk. You're going to get more lecturing as things go on through the day. And as you can tell, some of this information you keep hearing because it's all interlooped. I can't talk about interviews without talking about SBI, without talking about what your application looks like. So make sure you are taking the opportunity to find us, ask some questions. We are excited. I love working with this, and as I told you, interview season is one of the best seasons of the world because we get to meet all you fantastic people out there. So thank you so much for talking to us.
I think Nick's going to take questions.
Yeah. Thank you. I got one question yesterday from a medical student ambassador about getting offered the interview on the away.
Yes.
So this is fairly common practice, right, where students will be doing an away rotation in July and they'll get offered an interview. And that's way before when the interview season happens. Do you recommend a second look? What are your thoughts on that process?
My recommendation always is if you pack a suit, you are going to be. I heard the lady talking about the away interviews or away rotations, and she talked about it being the 28-day interview. If they can interview you while you're there, you're fresh in their brains, and they have seen you and your operations, I say go for it. I think it's a great thing. You guys are strapped for cash. And if you were coming from California and you did a whole month just because it's July and I know I'm going to look at you again in October, why wouldn't I, if I can get it set up, make that happen for you? So those are always a good thing. I would tell you not to turn it down unless there's a great reason to. I love that they don't have all the information that they might use to exclude you or move you up or down later on. So take it as an advantage because it's just you and your performance being talked about at that time, and I don't think there's any downside to it.
Yeah, every program is a little bit different about this, and this goes back to what you were saying about trying to read each other's minds. You know, some programs do this as a way of sort of extending their interview season, just being able to bring in more applicants, and you're, hey, you're already here, let's sit down and do an interview. On the flip side, some students sometimes take offense to this. They're like, well, it's not a legitimate interview. You know, it's August right now. You're not interviewing anybody else. You're just doing this because I'm here right now. And that's not really the program's attitude at all. You know, treat it like a legitimate interview. I agree entirely. Pack a suit so that if the offer...
And we try to make it like one. Some places might not, but we actually try to find 4 faculty members. We'll take you out for lunch. We'll get some resident to take you out to dinner that night. We make it mirror our regular interviews as much as possible.
And if you're doing a later rotation, like a September, October rotation, which sometimes students do, you know, then absolutely, you're almost universally invited to interview as part of that rotation, because it's like you're already here. Why should you come back in 4 weeks to go through this whole rigmarole again?
I'd be much more concerned if you are rotating in September or October and you don't get offered an interview. That might be a reason at the end of your rotation to sit down and figure out what is the aroma of what you are leaving behind and whether people thought you were a good fit or whether they thought you were a pile of poop. I'm just saying.
What?
I was just adding that the idea of a second look. Sometimes people think, oh, I interviewed in June or July, why don't you come back in October or November? I would say no. We spent a month with you guys, we interviewed you, we know you. Yeah. We're not going to forget you, I promise.
And the residents know you.
Over and over again. So, you know, if it would be a value for you to come back and see the program again, absolutely, but I don't think that that's something they necessarily need to do to refresh our program.
Yeah, and that's true. Even though, you know, there are also second looks that typically come out around like February-ish. Programs will send you out, hey, come back for a second look if you want. That has no bearing on your place on the rank list. That really is for you as a student to if you're really struggling, I want to rank this place first or second, I just can't, I need to go back and see it a little bit more. That's really the purpose of those kind of programs. And I will be perfectly candid that most of the places that offer them, it's actually their rank list is already done and sometimes even submitted before you even show up for those second look programs. So don't go thinking like, oh, it's going to really bump me up on this program that I love. It's I interviewed at that place. It was the first interview that I went to. Things are a little hazy because I went to 10 other places between now and then. And I'm trying to sort out between, Cynthia's program and Franzen's program, and I just can't make that up my mind.
Great. Well, we're at lunch. I have a particular interest in mentoring people who are coming from places, not necessarily internationally, but med schools that don't have an EM program. So I'm going to be at one of these tables, but look for me. There's also a couple other people looking at that.